When I returned from Costa Rica to find my bed dumped in the garage with a handwritten sign that read, "Stay out of our house," I didn't confront my son or create a family drama. Instead, I used my retirement savings to purchase the struggling community center next door that he'd been trying to acquire for years, transforming it into a thriving intergenerational learning hub that now serves hundreds of families, while my stunned son watches the parking lot he'd planned to build become the beating heart of our neighborhood and a living monument to the values he tried to erase. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Eleanor Wright, and at 70 years old, I discovered that sometimes our most painful family disappointments can become catalysts for creating something far more meaningful than we ever imagined. For nearly 4 decades, I devoted my life to education, starting as an elementary school reading specialist and eventually becoming the district literacy coordinator for one of the most innovative public school systems in our state. What began as a simple substitute teaching position in 1975, when I stepped in after another teacher left mid-year during a difficult divorce, blossomed into a career that shaped thousands of young readers and established literacy programs that continue serving our district to this day. In the early days, I worked endless hours at our modest ranch home's kitchen table, with my husband Daniel helping with everything from cutting out reading materials to building classroom bookshelves. We saved carefully until we could afford the down payment on what everyone in town called the Old Miller Place, a charming craftsman bungalow on Sycamore Street that had beautiful bones but needed considerable work after sitting vacant for several years. That house became our life's project. Daniel, with his remarkable carpentry skills and endless patience, spent weekends restoring built-in bookshelves, repairing the wide front porch, and gradually bringing each room back to its original character. I learned to refinish hardwood, floors, select period-appropriate colors, and research historical accuracy for each restoration decision. Our colleagues thought we were slightly mad, investing so much into a property most considered outdated and impractical. A house with history has stories embedded in its walls, Daniel would say when friends questioned our seemingly endless project. These old homes were built to nurture families and foster community, not just serve as real estate investments. The house wasn't just architecturally charming. It had a unique placement in our neighborhood. Situated directly beside the small community center that had once been the heart of our area, our property shared a generous side yard that blended into the center's grounds. For decades, this arrangement created a natural flow between our home and the community space, with neighborhood gatherings often spilling from one property to the other during summer block parties and holiday celebrations. Daniel and I had always been deeply involved with the community center, volunteering to maintain the building and helping organize programs. When budget cuts threatened its closure in the 1990s, we helped establish a neighborhood association that kept the doors open through volunteer staffing and community donations. The center became known for its after-school reading program, which I coordinated using materials and methods from my district work. Communities need gathering places as much as individuals need homes, Daniel would often say. The strength of a neighborhood isn't measured by property values, but by how people come together in shared spaces. Our son Michael had never shared our passion for education or community building. From an early age, his interests pulled in different directions. Always mathematically inclined and focused on financial security, he pursued a career in commercial real estate development, gradually building a company specializing in parking facilities and commercial properties throughout the region. While I was proud of his business acumen, I often worried about the disconnect between his values and the community-focused principles Daniel and I had tried to instill. As Michael established his own success, our differences became increasingly apparent. His visits home grew less frequent and shorter in duration. When he did come, conversations inevitably turned to the untapped potential of our property and the inefficient use of space represented by the community center next door. Mom, Doe. "You realize what this location could be worth with proper development?" he would ask, surveying our yard with the calculating eye of a developer rather than the affection of a son who had grown up climbing the massive oak tree that shaded both properties. "This whole block is prime for commercial conversion given its proximity to downtown." I would gently remind him that neighborhoods needed more than commercial value to thrive. They needed spaces where people connected, where children felt safe, where community identity developed through shared experience. These conversations usually ended with Michael's polite but dismissive nod, the kind that acknowledged my words without absorbing their meaning. After Daniel's unexpected heart attack 8 years ago, the community center became even more significant to me. While grieving, I poured energy into expanding its programs, establishing a senior reading circle alongside the children's activities. This intergenerational approach created something magical, older adults finding purpose through sharing stories with children, while young people benefited from the patience and wisdom their older reading partners provided. The center became my second home during those difficult months of adjustment to widowhood. The rhythms of the reading programs, the children's laughter, and the sense of purpose in mentoring both young readers and older volunteers provided structure when my personal life felt untethered by grief. Daniel had always been the one who believed in the center's importance to our neighborhood's identity. Continuing this work became my way of honoring his memory while rebuilding my own life. When I reached my 70th birthday, Michael's suggestions about downsizing and appropriate senior living options became more frequent and direct. Though I remained active and fully capable of maintaining my home with occasional help from neighborhood teenagers, he increasingly framed his concerns in terms of my long-term security and practical planning. While I recognized the genuine concern behind some of his suggestions, I also sensed the developer's calculations beneath his words. "The neighborhood is changing, Mom," he noted during one visit, carefully casual as he mentioned new zoning proposals that might affect property values. "It makes sense to consider your options while you can still maximize your investment in this place." I had always been transparent about my intentions. I planned to leave the house to Michael eventually, but wanted to remain there as long as possible. We had discussed a life estate arrangement that would give him ownership while ensuring my right to live in the home throughout my lifetime. This approach seemed to balance his interest in eventually acquiring the property with my desire to remain in the community I loved. The opportunity for my 3-month teaching program in Costa Rica came unexpectedly. A former student who had established an international literacy foundation invited me to help develop materials for rural communities with limited educational resources. The timing seemed perfect, early summer through late August, when the community center traditionally reduced programming due to family vacations and travel. Michael enthusiastically supported the idea, even offering to keep an eye on things during my absence. "You deserve this adventure, Mom," he insisted, helping me research travel requirements and even gifting me new lightweight luggage. "After all your years helping kids here, sharing your expertise internationally is the perfect next step." His support seemed so genuine that I never questioned the timing or his sudden interest in my travel plans. Before departing, I signed the life estate paperwork we had discussed, confident that this legal arrangement protected my interests while acknowledging Michael's eventual inheritance of the property. The document clearly specified my right to occupy the home throughout my lifetime, with Michael gaining ownership, but not possession until after my death. The Costa Rica program proved more fulfilling than I could have imagined. Working with dedicated teachers in under-resourced communities reconnected me with the fundamental joy of literacy education, seeing the moment when words unlock worlds of possibility. The program was intensive, with limited internet connectivity and long days that left little time for checking in at home. Michael sent occasional brief messages confirming that everything was fine, which I accepted without question. My return flight arrived late evening, and after 20 hours of travel, I expected to collapse into my own bed with stories to share in the days ahead. The taxi dropped me at the familiar curb, but as I approached the front door, I noticed something unusual: new locks that my key wouldn't fit. After several attempts and growing confusion, I moved to the side of the house, thinking I might enter through the kitchen door instead. What I discovered in the detached garage left me momentarily speechless. My bedroom furniture arranged in a crude approximation of a living space, with my clothing in boxes beside a small microwave and mini refrigerator. Taped to my dresser mirror was a handwritten note. "Welcome back. Please stay out of our house. We'll explain tomorrow." The shock of this discovery, being effectively evicted from my own home during my absence, created a moment of disorientation so complete that I simply stood staring at the transformed garage space, struggling to process what this arrangement implied. The deliberate planning evident in this setup made clear that this was no temporary misunderstanding, but calculated action taken with full awareness of its impact. As the initial shock subsided, I noticed additional details that revealed the comprehensive nature of Michael's plans. Property development notices posted on the community center next door indicated applications for demolition and construction permits under his company's name, with proposals for commercial development that would incorporate both properties into a unified complex. The application dates showed he had initiated this process within days of my departure for Costa Rica. In that moment of painful clarity, standing among my displaced possessions with evidence of my son's comprehensive betrayal surrounding me, I made a decision that would ultimately transform not just my circumstances, but our entire neighborhood's future. Rather than reactive confrontation or emotional appeal, I would respond with the same deliberate strategic approach that had guided my educational career, identifying fundamental needs, creating sustainable solutions, and building community. Support for shared vision beyond individual interests. I quietly gathered essential items for the night, located the spare key to my dear friend Margaret's house 3 blocks away, and slipped out before anyone in Michael's family noticed my arrival. The conversation with Michael could wait until morning. Tonight, I needed perspective and planning more than confrontation or explanation. Margaret's shocked reaction to my appearance at her door quickly transformed into practical support. As a retired attorney who had handled Daniel's estate matters, years earlier, she immediately recognized the legal implications of what had occurred. The life estate document explicitly guarantees your right to occupy the home throughout your lifetime, she confirmed after I explained the situation. Michael has ownership but absolutely no legal right to exclude you from the property or alter your living arrangements without your consent. His actions directly violate the terms of the agreement you signed. As we discussed immediate options for addressing this violation, Margaret mentioned something that suddenly illuminated the broader context of Michael's actions. The community center received a significant matching grant for renovations last month, money that would have secured its operations for at least a decade. But the neighborhood association board declined it because someone had submitted a competing bid to purchase the property outright. They didn't name the bidder, but timing suggests it might have been Michael's company. This information connected previously puzzling pieces: Michael's enthusiastic support for my extended absence, the development notices with suspiciously recent dates, his company's apparent interest in acquiring the community center property. The comprehensive nature of this plan, removing me from my home while simultaneously pursuing acquisition of the adjacent community property, revealed calculation far beyond mere opportunistic timing. As morning approached with plans for legal response taking shape, Margaret shared one additional piece of information that would ultimately transform my approach from simple property defense to community preservation. The neighborhood association is meeting tomorrow evening for final consideration of selling the community center. With grant funding declined and maintenance costs increasing, they're leaning toward accepting the purchase offer rather than continuing to struggle with funding operations. In that moment, something shifted in my perspective. Beyond personal betrayal toward recognition of the broader community impact these coordinated actions would create. The loss wouldn't just be my home, but a vital neighborhood resource that had served generations of families, provided educational opportunities for countless children, and created connective tissue between neighbors across decades. Sometimes, Margaret observed as we finalized immediate response plans. The most effective answer to calculated self-interest isn't just legal defense, but creative community investment that demonstrates different values and possibilities. By morning, with Margaret's help, I had secured temporary accommodations, consulted with her colleagues specializing in property law, and begun developing an approach that would address both my immediate housing situation and the broader threat to our neighborhood's character and connections. When Michael arrived at Margaret's home for our scheduled conversation, his carefully rehearsed explanation about practical arrangements during transition to more appropriate senior housing quickly faltered when confronted with the legal reality of the life estate provisions and my clear understanding of his coordinated development plans. The garage apartment was just a temporary solution, he insisted, his confident developer persona giving way to defensive justification. We can discuss better arrangements once you understand the practical benefits of the overall development plan. The community center is outdated and underutilized. My proposal creates modern facilities with much better return on the property value. Different perspectives measure value through different metrics, I responded, maintaining calm clarity despite my profound disappointment. The life estate document we signed reflects my clearly expressed intentions about remaining in my home. The community center provides neighborhood connections and educational opportunities that commercial development cannot replace, regardless of financial calculations. As Michael realized his careful plans had encountered unexpected resistance, he shifted to what he clearly considered his strongest argument. Mom, this development represents significant financial security for your future and substantial inheritance potential for future generations. The market value of these combined properties with proper development far exceeds their current use value. What he failed to understand, despite years of conversation and shared experience, was that my metrics for value had never centered on market calculations or investment return. My life's work in education had always focused on human potential, community connections, and creating environments where learning flourished through relationship rather than transaction. As our conversation concluded without resolution, I shared the only decision I had finalized. I'll be enforcing my legal right to occupy my home as specified in our agreement. The displacement of my belongings and unauthorized changing of locks constitutes clear violation of those terms. Margaret's colleague will be contacting you with formal notification of these issues requiring immediate remedy. What I didn't share was the plan already forming. Not just to reclaim my rightful place in my home, but to preserve the community resource Michael's development plans would eliminate. Sometimes protecting what matters requires more than defensive action. It demands creative investment in alternative possibilities that demonstrate different values in tangible, sustainable ways. By that afternoon, I had made two decisions that would ultimately transform both my personal circumstances and our neighborhood's future. First, I would attend the neighborhood association meeting that evening to address the proposed sale of the community center, with alternative that honored its historical purpose while creating sustainable future. Second, I would use my carefully managed teacher's pension savings, funds I had planned to leave for Michael's children's education, to present competing offer for the community center property that would preserve its function while expanding its impact. The narrative Michael had crafted, of outdated properties requiring proper development to maximize value, was about to encounter an alternative vision rooted in community needs, educational purpose, and intergenerational connection that measured value through human impact rather than market metrics. When I rose to speak at the neighborhood association meeting that evening, few present knew about my personal circumstances or the development plans threatening both properties. Rather than beginning with opposition to Michael's proposal, I shared vision for what the community center could become with proper investment and renewed purpose, an intergenerational learning space connecting our neighborhood's history with its future through expanded literacy programs, technology access for seniors, after-school educational support, and community heritage preservation. The value of this space isn't measured through potential commercial development, I explained, standing before the 27 neighbors gathered in the community center's main room, the very space Michael planned to demolish within months. It's measured through the connections it creates, the learning it fosters, and the community identity it preserves across generations. Sometimes investment return should be calculated in human potential rather than property appreciation. As I spoke, I could see the change in expressions around the room. From resignation about the inevitable loss of their community space to rekindled hope about what it might become instead. Several older residents nodded in recognition when I mentioned how the center had hosted their children's first art exhibitions or basketball games, while younger parents leaned forward as I described expanded after-school programs that would address critical childcare gaps in our neighborhood. What we're facing isn't just a financial decision about property, I continued, but a choice about what kind of neighborhood we want to be. Do we want to be a place where community connections are sacrificed for commercial development, or a place where different generations learn from each other and create shared identity through meaningful interaction? When I concluded by presenting my formal purchase offer, matching the commercial bid, but with binding provisions, ensuring the property would remain community educational space in perpetuity, the immediate response was spontaneous applause from longtime residents who had watched their children and grandchildren benefit from programs housed there over decades. What made my proposal different from previous attempts to save the struggling center wasn't just funding, but vision. Connecting the educational purpose with sustainable operational model through partnerships with local institutions that would provide both resources and consistent programming. The community college's education department would use the space for teaching practicums, bringing future educators into direct community experience while providing staffed programs at minimal cost. The local technology company would establish Digital Literacy Lab for seniors, addressing isolation while creating intergenerational mentoring opportunities between tech-savvy youth and older adults navigating digital systems. I'm offering not just purchase price that matches the commercial bid, I explained as the room quieted, but implementation plan that transforms this space from struggling facility into vibrant educational hub with sustainable funding model beyond constant fundraising efforts. The structure would preserve historical elements while updating functional spaces to serve contemporary educational needs across generations. The board chair, Martin Henderson, who had been reluctantly leading the difficult discussions about selling the property, looked visibly relieved. We've been searching for viable alternative that would preserve the center's community purpose while addressing operational sustainability. This proposal seems to address both concerns through structured partnerships rather than just continued donation dependency. The vote was scheduled for the following week to allow proper consideration, but the energy shift in the room made clear which direction sentiment had turned. Several board members approached me afterward with offers to help refine the implementation plan, sharing expertise from their professional backgrounds in education, facilities management, and nonprofit administration. As I walked home with Margaret, that evening, to her house rather than mine, since my own remained inaccessible until legal action restored my rightful occupancy, she observed something important about what had just occurred. You didn't just offer money to prevent development. You provided alternative vision that spoke to what people truly value beyond market metrics. That's why they responded so powerfully. The following morning brought the inevitable confrontation with Michael. I had requested return of my house keys and removal of the improper locks through Margaret's colleague's formal legal notification. When Michael arrived at Margaret's home, his expression revealed the complex mixture of emotions beneath his developer persona: frustration at encountering unexpected resistance, calculation about potential legal vulnerabilities, and genuine confusion about my unwillingness to embrace his vision of practical solutions to property management. The garage arrangement was just temporary while we sorted out proper senior housing options, he began, his tone suggesting reasonable accommodation rather than property violation. "You need to understand the comprehensive benefits of my development plan. Not just financial return, but modern facilities that would serve more people more efficiently than that outdated community center." Rather than engaging with this framing, I maintained focus on the specific legal violation his actions represented. "The life estate agreement we signed explicitly guarantees my right to occupy my home throughout my lifetime. Changing locks and relocating my possessions without consent directly violates those terms. I'll be returning home today with locksmith to restore proper access." His expression shifted as he realized this wasn't a negotiable aspect we could debate through relative merits. "Fine, we can adjust the timeline on the residential portion," he conceded, his developer mindset immediately calculating fallback position. "But the community center acquisition is separate business matter that makes fundamental sense for neighborhood development. That outdated facility is financial drain that could become productive commercial space benefiting the entire area." What Michael couldn't know, because he hadn't attended the neighborhood association meeting, was that his commercial bid for the community center had already effectively been countered. Rather than revealing this prematurely, I responded to the values premises underlying his position. "Different perspectives measure neighborhood benefit through different metrics," I noted calmly. "The programs housed in that outdated facility have provided educational foundation for generations of children, connection points for seniors who would otherwise face isolation, and community identity that transcends property values. Those benefits don't appear on commercial development spreadsheets, but represent real value to people who live here." Michael's response revealed the fundamental disconnect in our perspectives. "Mom, I understand you have emotional attachment to these old buildings and programs, but practical reality requires realistic assessment of what's sustainable. That community center has been struggling financially for years. My development creates tax base supporting municipal services benefiting everyone, not just the handful of people using those programs." This characterization, reducing vibrant community resource to emotional attachment, while framing commercial development as pragmatic necessity, highlighted exactly why intervention had become essential. Michael wasn't simply making business decision. He was imposing value system that privileged financial metrics over human connection, market calculations over community meaning. The center served over 500 families last year through various programs, I corrected gently. "That's not handful but significant portion of our neighborhood population. And sustainability comes in different forms beyond commercial tax base, creating connected community where people know their neighbors, where children have safe places to learn outside school hours, where seniors maintain purpose through sharing knowledge across generations." As our conversation continued without resolution, Michael eventually shifted to what he clearly considered his strongest argument. "This development would create significant financial security for your future and substantial inheritance potential for your grandchildren. The property values we're talking about represent major portion of your assets that could be generating much better returns through proper development." What he failed to understand, despite lifetime of shared experience, was that I had never measured security or legacy primarily through financial assets or investment returns. My career and education had always focused on different metrics: human potential developed, community connections strengthened, opportunities created for those with limited resources to access knowledge transforming their possibilities. "I appreciate your concern for my financial security," I acknowledged sincerely, "but my teacher's pension provides adequately for my needs. And legacy isn't measured solely through assets transferred to future generations, but through values demonstrated and community impact created. Your children may ultimately inherit less property value, but more meaningful understanding of what creates thriving neighborhoods beyond commercial development." When Michael left without resolution, beyond grudging agreement to restore my home, access as legally required, his expression reflected genuine bewilderment rather than simple frustration. Despite being raised by parents who had consistently demonstrated community-focused values, he truly couldn't comprehend prioritizing neighborhood connections over property appreciation or measuring security through relationships rather than financial assets. That afternoon, with Margaret's colleague present to ensure compliance, I returned to my home while locksmith replaced the unauthorized locks Michael had installed during my absence. The process revealed additional concerning discoveries. Family photographs had been removed from walls, personal papers relocated from my desk, and several sentimental items, including Daniel's collection of handcrafted woodworking tools, nowhere to be found. Document everything, Margaret's colleague advised, taking photographs of the altered living space. These unauthorized changes to your personal property further strengthen legal position regarding life estate violations. Will include comprehensive inventory of missing items in our formal communication. While the legal process addressed immediate property rights, my focus had already expanded beyond personal circumstances toward community preservation. That evening, I met with a small group of neighborhood association board members who had requested additional information about my proposal for the community center. The questions they raised weren't about purchase price, which matched the commercial offer, but about operational sustainability and programming vision. We've tried various approaches to keeping the center financially viable, explained Janet Morrison, who had served on the board for 15 years. The challenge isn't just funding building maintenance, but staffing programs consistently without exhausting volunteer resources. How would your approach differ from previous efforts? This question cut to the heart of why community spaces often struggle despite good intentions. Volunteer enthusiasm typically starts strong, but eventually diminishes as personal circumstances change or burnout affects the most dedicated contributors. Sustainable community resources require institutional partnerships that provide consistent resources beyond individual efforts. I outlined the structured partnerships forming the foundation of my proposal. Formal agreement with the community college, placing student teachers in supervised practicum experiences that would provide reliable program staffing. Technology company sponsorship, creating digital literacy lab, serving both seniors and children while providing technical support and equipment updates. And healthcare provider partnership, establishing wellness programs, addressing preventive care, through community-based education. What makes this approach different isn't just funding source but organizational structure, I explained. Rather than depending primarily on volunteer efforts supplemented by donations, we're creating mutually beneficial institutional partnerships where each participating organization receives clear value aligned with their core mission while contributing to sustainable community resource. The education students would gain practical teaching experience in diverse community setting, experience increasingly valued by school districts hiring new teachers. The technology company would fulfill community engagement requirements for their tax incentive package while developing potential future employees through youth programs. The healthcare provider would address preventive care objectives tied to their reimbursement metrics while reducing social isolation among seniors, factor increasingly recognized as healthcare determinant. This isn't charity model but reciprocal. Partnership structure, I emphasized. Each participating organization receives tangible benefits aligned with their institutional goals, while collectively creating sustainable community resource serving diverse neighborhood needs. As board members engaged with specific aspects of the proposal, asking detailed questions about space utilization, program scheduling, governance structure, and evaluation metrics, their expressions shifted from skeptical assessment to engaged collaboration. Several offered specific connections to potential additional partners or suggestions for program elements addressing neighborhood needs I hadn't fully considered. By meeting's end, what had begun as my individual proposal had evolved into collaborative vision with multiple stakeholders contributing expertise and connections. The transformation wasn't just about saving building from demolition, but reimagining its purpose through collective wisdom about what our neighborhood truly needed beyond commercial development. The week between this planning meeting and the scheduled neighborhood association vote transformed my understanding of community engagement. What had begun as defensive response to personal displacement and community loss had evolved into catalyst for neighborhood connection that transcended the immediate property question. Residents who had never attended association meetings appeared at impromptu planning sessions hosted in living rooms throughout the area. Teenagers offered suggestions for program elements that would actually engage their peers rather than adult assumptions about what youth needed. Seniors shared knowledge about neighborhood history that could inform heritage preservation aspects of the revitalized center. Michael observed this growing momentum with visible frustration. His commercial development proposal had presented polished renderings of modern facilities with carefully calculated economic impact projections. My alternative proposal had evolved into messy, collaborative community process, with constantly expanding participation and evolving vision that couldn't be captured in architectural drawings or financial spreadsheets. When the neighborhood association gathered for their scheduled vote the following week, the meeting had to be moved from the community center's main room to the adjacent playground because attendance exceeded building capacity. Families brought folding chairs and blankets, creating impromptu community gathering that physically demonstrated what the space meant beyond its property value. The board chair seemed momentarily overwhelmed by the unprecedented turnout before, adapting the format to accommodate broader participation. Rather than formal presentation of competing proposals, he invited community dialogue about what the center represented to different generations and what its future might become through collaborative reimagining. Longtime residents shared stories about the center's origins in the 1960s, when neighbors had literally built portions of the structure through volunteer labor. Parents described how after-school programs had provided safe space for their children while enabling their own employment security. Teenagers spoke about finding mentors and developing skills through programs hosted there over years. When Michael finally spoke, visibly uncomfortable addressing community gathering rather than board presentation, his carefully prepared economic arguments seemed strangely disconnected from the lived experiences surrounding him. His projections about increased tax base and property value appreciation fell flat against stories about children learning to read, seniors finding purpose through volunteer teaching, and families connecting across cultural differences through shared community space. The formal vote, when finally conducted, was anticlimactic given the clear community sentiment. The board unanimously approved my purchase offer with its perpetual educational use provisions, spontaneous applause confirming widespread support for preserving community resource rather than converting it to commercial development. As meeting concluded, I found myself surrounded by neighbors offering implementation help. From retired contractors volunteering renovation expertise to teachers proposing specific program elements addressing educational gaps they observed through their classroom experience. What had begun as individual response to personal displacement had evolved into community movement, reimagining shared space through collective vision and collaborative action. Michael departed immediately after the vote without conversation, his expression revealing mixture of professional frustration and personal confusion about outcome that contradicted his market-based expectations. While I felt profound sadness about our relationship's strain, clarity about community values provided counterbalance to personal disappointment. The following morning brought unexpected email from Michael's wife, Jennifer, who had remained noticeably absent throughout these contentions. Her message offered perspective I hadn't considered. Michael genuinely believes his development approach represents progress and practical improvement over what he sees as outdated, inefficient structures and programs. He struggles to understand why others don't recognize the benefits he sees so clearly through his professional lens. This framing, Michael's actions reflecting sincerely held perspective, rather than simply callous disregard, provided important reminder about assuming negative intentions rather than recognizing genuine differences in values and priorities. While his approach threatened community resources I considered essential, His perspective arose from professional education and experience that truly measured progress through different metrics than those guiding my educational career. This recognition didn't change necessary opposition to his development plans, but shifted my understanding of our fundamental disconnect. The conversation wasn't simply about right versus wrong decisions, but about profoundly different value systems, measuring progress and success through incompatible frameworks. As I began coordinating renovation planning for the newly secured community center, this awareness informed my approach to potential healing in family relationships. Rather than positioning our differences as moral failing or character flaw, I could recognize genuine perspective difference requiring bridge building rather than conversion or defeat. 3 days after the neighborhood association vote, legal process restored my full access to my home. The formal documentation of property violations and missing personal items created unambiguous record of inappropriate actions requiring remedy, while life estate provisions established clear legal framework protecting my continued residence rights, regardless of Michael's ownership position. Returning home fully, moving my belongings back from the garage space where they had been relegated, created emotional mixture of relief, sadness, and determination. Each room contained memories of life with Daniel that remained precious, despite Michael's attempt to sever my connection to this space. The garden, where we had spent countless evenings planning community center programs, still bloomed with perennials Daniel had planted decades earlier. The kitchen table, where we had developed literacy materials for generations of children, remained solid and welcoming. Yet something had fundamentally shifted through this experience. What had previously felt primarily like personal home now represented something broader, physical manifestation of values that required active protection rather than passive assumption. The property wasn't just private residence, but embodiment of community-focused principles that Michael's actions had threatened through prioritizing market value over human connection. As renovation planning for the community center proceeded, through collaborative process involving multiple stakeholders, unexpected opportunity emerged through challenge Michael's development company filed with zoning board. His legal team argued that my proposed educational use represented change, requiring special variance under existing zoning regulations. Technical objection that might potentially delay implementation despite neighborhood association approval. This apparent obstacle created opening for something more significant. Comprehensive rezoning proposal establishing neighborhood heritage district with specific provisions protecting community spaces while allowing appropriate development aligned with resident priorities. Rather than simply defending individual property, we could create structural framework preserving neighborhood character and community resources through formal zoning protections. Working with urban planning professor from local university, neighborhood, committee developed proposal designating certain properties, including community center and surrounding areas, as community benefit spaces with specific protection from commercial conversion. The framework didn't prevent development but required any changes demonstrate clear community benefit beyond market metrics, with formal resident participation in approval processes. When presented to City Planning Commission, this approach received unexpected support from members concerned about similar community space losses throughout metropolitan area. What had begun as defensive response to specific development threat evolved into potential model for neighborhood preservation balancing appropriate growth with community character protection. 6 weeks after the neighborhood association vote, with formal closing completed on community center purchase and renovation planning advancing through collaborative design process, I received unexpected message from Michael requesting meeting to discuss future relationship parameters given recent developments. The formal language revealed continued emotional distance, but suggested openness to establishing new framework beyond current impasse. We met at neutral location, coffee shop halfway between my home and his office, rather than spaces carrying emotional significance for either of us. His initial demeanor maintained professional reserve, as though approaching business negotiation rather than family reconciliation. My development company is focusing on different neighborhood with more receptive environment for commercial projects, he began, establishing business consequences before addressing personal implications. While I maintain that my proposal represented practical improvement and economic benefit, continued pursuit of this particular location doesn't represent efficient use of resources given community opposition. This framing, development decision, based on practical considerations rather than acknowledging community values or relationship repair, maintained his perspective while creating opening for potential conversation beyond property dispute. Rather than challenging his characterization, I accepted this starting point for dialogue that might eventually bridge our fundamental differences. I appreciate your willingness to meet, I responded, focusing on relationship rather than property outcome. While we clearly see neighborhood development through different frameworks, finding way forward in our family relationship matters independently from business decisions or property questions. Michael's expression revealed momentary vulnerability beneath professional persona, suggestion that personal relationship held value separate from property resolution, despite his actions' indication otherwise. Jennifer thinks we should establish regular family dinners regardless of professional disagreements, he offered, revealing his wife's behind-the-scenes efforts toward reconciliation. The children miss their regular visits with you. This opening, connection, through his children rather than direct relationship repair, provided pathway worth pursuing despite continuing tension. My grandchildren had always represented bridge between our different value systems, their natural embrace of both practical skills Michael valued and community connections I prioritized, creating common ground otherwise difficult to establish. Would welcome that, I agreed sincerely. The children shouldn't bear consequences of adult disagreements or different perspectives on neighborhood development. Perhaps we could start with Sunday dinner this weekend at my home, their home too, with memories and connections worth preserving regardless of property ownership technicalities. Michael's slight relaxation revealed meaningful step despite continuing distance. Jennifer suggested something similar, he acknowledged. 6 o'clock Sunday would work with the children's schedules. As our conversation concluded without dramatic reconciliation but with practical next steps toward relationship repair, Michael hesitated before adding unexpected comment. The Community Center project has received substantial media coverage emphasizing educational innovation rather than just property preservation. The collaborative implementation model has attracted attention beyond local neighborhood. This observation, recognizing broader significance beyond our specific conflict, suggested potential shift in his understanding, however limited. While he might not embrace community values replacing market metrics in his development approach, he could at least recognize legitimate alternative to his professional framework with meaningful impact beyond what he had dismissed as sentimental attachment to outdated structures. As I walked home afterward, the conversation's limited progress provided perspective on relationship healing requiring patience rather than immediate resolution. Our fundamental value differences remained unchanged, Michael continuing to prioritize financial calculations and market efficiency, while I measured success through community connection and human development. Yet finding practical coexistence, despite these differences, represented necessary first step toward potential deeper understanding. The community center renovation began the following week, with volunteer teams handling initial preparation while professional contractors managed structural issues requiring specialized expertise. The collaborative process embodied exactly the community-building purpose the center would serve, people contributing different skills towards shared vision that transcended individual interests or market considerations. What had begun as devastating personal betrayal, returning from meaningful service to find myself displaced from my own home, had transformed into catalyst for community preservation and development model, potentially benefiting neighborhoods beyond our own. Sometimes painful circumstances reveal essentials otherwise obscured by comfortable routines, creating clarity about what truly matters and opportunity to demonstrate values through concrete action rather than theoretical principles. The sign that had greeted me in the garage that shocking evening, "Stay out of our house," had intended to establish ownership claimed through legal technicality despite lifelong connection. The response it ultimately triggered created something far more significant than property reclamation or personal vindication. Community preservation framework, potentially protecting neighborhood spaces throughout the region while demonstrating development model measuring success through human connection rather than market metrics alone. 1 year later, the Sycamore Street Learning Exchange celebrated its first anniversary on a perfect autumn afternoon. The renovated community centers, doors thrown open to welcome hundreds of neighborhood residents to the celebration. What had once been a struggling facility facing commercial demolition had transformed into a vibrant intergenerational hub that served as both educational resource and community anchor for our neighborhood. Standing on the wide front porch, now, fully accessible through thoughtfully designed ramps that complemented the building's historic character, I watched families stream into the celebration with a sense of wonder at how profoundly things had changed in just 12 months. Children raced toward the new playground equipment installed through partnership with local businesses. Teenagers guided seniors into the digital literacy lab, where reverse mentoring programs had created unexpected connections across generations. Young parents chatted with retired teachers who provided after-school reading support that had measurably improved literacy outcomes throughout the neighborhood. When you presented this vision a year ago, I honestly wasn't sure it could work, admitted Martin Henderson, who had chaired the neighborhood association during the pivotal vote that saved the center from development. The operational challenges seemed overwhelming even if we could secure the property. Yet here we are with more programs, more participants, and sustainable funding model unlike anything we imagined possible. This transformation hadn't happened through single dramatic solution, but through integrated approach combining institutional partnerships, community participation, and operational structure that balanced educational mission with practical sustainability. The renovated facility physically embodied this balanced approach, preserving historical elements that connected to neighborhood heritage, while incorporating contemporary design supporting diverse educational functions and efficient operations. Taco Sucks, Main Hall, where generations of children had played basketball and community gatherings, had marked neighborhood milestones, retained its soaring ceiling and warm wood flooring while gaining energy-efficient lighting and acoustic treatments that made the space suitable for everything from physical education to community performances. The former administrative offices had been reconfigured into flexible learning spaces where community college education students conducted supervised teaching practicums with neighborhood children, providing reliable program staffing while giving future teachers invaluable practical experience. Most significantly, the renovation had transformed the building's underutilized basement into state-of-the-art technology center, where 3 distinct but interconnected programs operated simultaneously. Digital literacy training for seniors navigating increasingly essential online systems, STEM programming for neighborhood youth developing technical skills, and community digital archive preserving neighborhood history through resident-contributed photographs, oral histories, and artifacts being professionally cataloged and digitized. The model you've developed here is attracting attention well beyond this neighborhood, noted Dr. Elaine Chen, Dean of Education at the Community College and key institutional partner in the Learning Exchange. The integration of academic preparation with direct community service addresses multiple challenges simultaneously, giving our education students authentic teaching experience while providing consistent, quality programming for community members across generations. What had begun as defensive response to personal displacement and community threat had evolved into innovative educational model with potential applications far beyond our specific circumstances. The Learning Exchange demonstrated approach to community education that balanced institutional resources with neighborhood needs, professional expertise with resident participation, and historical preservation with contemporary function. As the anniversary celebration continued around me, I found myself reflecting on the remarkable journey from that shocking evening when I returned from Costa Rica to find my belongings relegated to the garage with that crude sign declaring me unwelcome. In my own home, the betrayal had been profound, not just violation of legal property rights, but fundamental dismissal of the values and connections that defined home beyond mere ownership. Yet this painful experience had ultimately revealed clarity and purpose that might otherwise have remained dormant beneath comfortable routines and good intentions. The threatened loss of both personal home and community center had crystallized understanding about what truly mattered. Not property ownership or market value, but human connections and shared purpose that created neighborhood identity beyond. Commercial development metrics. Most surprisingly, this clarity had created unexpected bridge with Michael that our previous comfortable disagreements had never achieved. While our fundamental value systems remained distinct, his continuing to prioritize financial efficiency and market considerations while mine emphasized community connection and human development, the concrete manifestation of these different approaches had created space for mutual recognition that abstract discussions never accomplished. As though summoned by these reflections, Michael appeared at the celebration with Jennifer and their children, their arrival marking significant evolution from our relationship's lowest point a year earlier. While the initial family dinners following our coffee shop meeting had been awkward affairs balanced precariously between politeness and genuine connection, gradual engagement had emerged through the children's enthusiastic participation in learning exchange programs. 12-year-old Emma had discovered unexpected passion for oral history through the center's digital archive project, conducting interviews with neighborhood seniors about community changes they had witnessed across decades. 10-year-old Ethan had found mechanical mentor through the intergenerational makerspace, where retired engineers taught practical skills rarely included in standard education. Their genuine enthusiasm had created opening Michael couldn't easily dismiss despite his continuing skepticism about the center's organizational model. "Dad, come see what we finished," Emma called, pulling Michael toward the technology center where the digital archive was featured prominently in the anniversary celebration. They installed our oral history interviews with interactive timeline showing neighborhood development across 70 years. You can literally see how everything changed while hearing people's actual experiences during different periods. Michael allowed himself to be guided through the exhibition, his developer's analytical perspective gradually engaging with the material beyond initial polite interest. The project presented neighborhood evolution through multiple lenses simultaneously: historical photographs and documents showing physical development, resident interviews describing lived experience during different periods, and data visualization, mapping demographic and economic patterns over time. "This is remarkably comprehensive planning documentation," he acknowledged, professional assessment momentarily overriding personal distance. "The integration of qualitative experience with quantitative patterns provides unusually nuanced understanding of neighborhood development factors across decades." "That's exactly what urban studies researchers from the university said," Emma reported proudly. "They're incorporating our methodology into graduate program curriculum because it captures development patterns usually missing from conventional planning analyses." This recognition, academic validation of approach Michael could respect professionally, despite emerging from value system he didn't personally share, created unexpected connection point bridging our fundamental differences. While he might never fully embrace community-centered metrics replacing market considerations, he could acknowledge legitimate alternative framework producing outcomes valuable even within his professional perspective. As Michael explored the exhibition with genuine interest rather than mere politeness, I observed similar evolution occurring throughout the learning exchange that day. Residents who had initially divided along generational or socioeconomic lines during development debates found connection points through shared participation in center programs. Seniors who had opposed certain renovation elements as unnecessary Modernization now enthusiastically demonstrated technology skills acquired through digital literacy training. Young professionals who had supported Michael's commercial development for potential property value enhancement now volunteered as program mentors, recognizing community benefits beyond market metrics. Your vision for this place has actually created something neither side anticipated during last year's conflict, observed Margaret, who had joined me on the porch watching this community tapestry unfold before us. It's not just preserved building or defeated development proposal, but demonstrated entirely different approach to neighborhood vitality, measuring success through human connection rather than commercial metrics. This perspective, seeing beyond binary opposition toward transformative alternative, captured something essential about the learning exchange's significance beyond specific programs or services. The center had become physical embodiment of value system measuring neighborhood health through educational opportunity, intergenerational connection, and shared purpose rather than property appreciation or commercial development. The anniversary. Celebration continued into evening, transitioning from daytime family activities to community dinner where residents shared dishes reflecting neighborhood's diverse cultural heritage. As twilight settled over the gathering, informal program emerged where community members offered reflections on the center's significance in their lives across generations. Mrs. Abernathy, at 93, the neighborhood's oldest resident, described attending community dances in the main hall during the 1940s, where she had first met her husband returning from military service. Recent immigrant parents expressed gratitude for educational support, helping their children navigate unfamiliar school system while maintaining cultural connections through heritage programming. Teenagers credited technology training with developing skills leading to first employment opportunities beyond typical service jobs previously available. When Martin Henderson invited me to share my perspective as the catalyst behind the center's transformation, I found myself reflecting on a journey far more complex than simple property preservation or program development. What we're celebrating today isn't just buildings saved from demolition or programs created through institutional partnerships, I began, looking across faces representing neighborhoods' full diversity. We're recognizing community's capacity to define itself through shared values and connections transcending market metrics or commercial development pressures that increasingly shape our cities. As I continued, the themes that had crystallized through this challenging year emerged with clarity. I hadn't fully articulated even to myself until this moment. When I returned from Costa Rica to find myself displaced from my home with that sign telling me to stay out of our house, I experienced painful lesson about property rights versus belonging that many communities face on larger scale through development pressures and economic displacement. The parallel between personal experience and broader community challenges created unexpected connection with residents who had faced similar pressures through rising property values, changing neighborhood demographics, and development redefining community character without resident participation. My individual story had embodied collective experience often difficult to articulate through conventional planning discussions or development debates. What emerged through our shared response wasn't just preservation of particular building, but demonstration that community defines itself through connections and purpose beyond property ownership or market value, I continued. The learning exchange represents alternative development approach measuring neighborhood health through human relationships, educational opportunity, and intergenerational connection rather than commercial metrics alone. As my remarks concluded, the spontaneous standing ovation reflected recognition beyond personal appreciation, community acknowledging shared accomplishment, creating alternative to development patterns that increasingly threatened neighborhood identity throughout our region. The learning exchange wasn't just successful program center, but tangible demonstration that different metrics could guide neighborhood development when residents claimed active role-defining community character beyond market forces. Later that evening, as celebration transitioned to cleanup involving volunteers across generations working together with remarkable efficiency, born from genuine community ownership, Michael approached with uncharacteristic hesitation, suggesting conversation beyond polite family reconciliation. The exhibition Emma's involved with presents compelling case for integrated development approach I hadn't previously considered, he began, professional assessment providing safer entry point than personal acknowledgement. The documented correlation between community connection infrastructure and neighborhood stability metrics suggests different development framework worth exploring from market perspective. This framing, potential market validation for community-centered approach, represented significant evolution from dismissing preservation efforts as merely sentimental attachment to outdated structures. While Michael might never fully embrace value system prioritizing community connection over commercial efficiency, he could now recognize legitimate alternative development framework with measurable outcomes beyond emotional satisfaction. The learning exchange represents one model integrating community preservation with contemporary function, I acknowledged, accepting this limited bridge across our fundamental differences. Different neighborhoods might require different specific applications, but the underlying principle remains consistent. Development measuring success through human connection and shared purpose alongside financial metrics. Michael nodded, his analytical mind visibly processing implications beyond our specific situation. The urban planning department has approached my company about potential mixed-use project incorporating community educational space using partnership, structure similar to your model here. I'd appreciate your perspective on essential elements that make this approach functional beyond good intentions. This request, professional consultation acknowledging expertise beyond sentimental advocacy, represented perhaps the most meaningful reconciliation possible given our fundamentally different value systems. While Michael might never prioritize community connection over market efficiency in his development approach, he could now recognize legitimate alternative worth incorporating into professional framework rather than dismissing as impractical idealism. Our conversation continued with surprisingly productive exchange about specific structural elements making the learning exchange sustainable beyond volunteer enthusiasm or grant funding cycles. The institutional partnerships providing reliable staffing through educational practicums, technology company engagement addressing digital access while developing future workforce, and healthcare provider programming offering preventive services through community-based education, all represented replicable model potentially applicable across diverse development contexts. As evening concluded with community members dispersing after transforming the celebration space back to functional programming configuration with remarkable efficiency, I found myself reflecting on journey far more complex than simple property dispute or preservation victory. The sign that had greeted me in the garage that shocking night, "Stay out of our house," had triggered response creating something none of us had initially imagined. Demonstration that community development could measure success through metrics, beyond market value while creating sustainable model replicable beyond our specific circumstances. The months following our anniversary celebration brought unexpected developments, further validating the learning exchange model beyond our neighborhood. Context. Urban planning researchers from the university incorporated our approach into case study curriculum examining alternative metrics for community development success. Regional Community Foundation provided implementation grant supporting similar centers in 3 additional neighborhoods facing development pressures threatening community spaces. Most surprisingly, Michael's development company established dedicated division focused on mixed-use projects incorporating educational and community connection spaces using partnership structure modeled after our approach. While these external validations provided gratifying confirmation about the model's broader applicability, the most meaningful outcomes remained intensely local, measured through daily interactions and incremental transformations occurring within our neighborhood's social fabric. The seniors who had initially participated in digital literacy training primarily for practical skills now mentored immigrant families navigating unfamiliar systems through newly acquired technological confidence. Teenagers who had found initial employment through technology skills development returned as program volunteers, supporting younger participants following similar paths. Residents previously disconnected through generational or cultural differences found connection points through shared participation in learning programs, addressing common interests beyond demographic categories. 6 months after our anniversary, celebration. The Learning Exchange hosted regional symposium examining community-centered development approaches that balanced preservation with contemporary function, resident participation with institutional resources, and neighborhood character, with necessary adaptation. Representatives from municipalities across the region gathered to examine our model's potential application within diverse contexts, facing similar challenges, balancing development pressures with community preservation. During panel discussion, exploring essential elements making community-centered development sustainable beyond volunteer enthusiasm or grant funding cycles, I found myself seated beside Michael, our different perspectives now viewed as complementary expertise rather than oppositional positions. His analysis of financial structures supporting community educational spaces provided practical implementation framework, balancing mission-driven operations with necessary sustainability metrics. My emphasis on institutional partnerships creating mutual benefit beyond philanthropic contribution demonstrated engagement model maintaining operational stability while advancing each partner's core objectives. As we presented these integrated perspectives, the audience response reflected recognition that false dichotomy between market-driven development and community preservation limited potential solutions addressing contemporary challenges. The Learning Exchange demonstrated alternative approach, integrating multiple value systems rather than privileging either commercial metrics or preservation priorities exclusively. What makes this model particularly compelling from implementation perspective is the integration of diverse measurement frameworks beyond conventional development metrics. Michael noted during our presentation, his professional vocabulary now incorporating concepts previously outside his market-focused approach. The documented correlation between community connection infrastructure and neighborhood stability suggests different development approach worth exploring from market perspective, while advancing social objectives beyond commercial considerations. This evolution, integrating community value metrics within market-oriented framework rather than treating them as inherently oppositional, represented perhaps the most significant transformation emerging from our painful conflict. While Michael continued prioritizing financial efficiency and market considerations in his professional approach, he now recognized legitimate alternative measurement systems worth incorporating rather than dismissing as impractical idealism or sentimental attachment. One evening following community workshop where Michael had presented innovative financing models supporting educational spaces within mixed-use developments, we found ourselves discussing this evolution while watching Emma and Ethan enthusiastically participate in intergenerational technology project pairing youth with seniors creating digital storytelling presentations. I still believe efficient resource allocation represents essential development principle, Michael acknowledged, his fundamental values unchanged despite expanding perspective. But watching how this place functions has demonstrated different efficiency framework, measuring outcomes through human connection and capability development alongside financial metrics. These aren't opposing considerations, but complementary measurement, systems capturing more complete understanding of development impact. This insight, recognizing multiple valid frameworks measuring development success rather than privileging financial metrics exclusively, represented meaningful bridge across values gap that had previously seemed unbridgeable. While our fundamental perspectives remained distinct, mutual recognition had replaced dismissive opposition, creating space for collaborative approach incorporating diverse measurement systems within integrated development framework. As the Learning Exchange approached its second anniversary, Regional Planning Commission incorporated our model into policy recommendations addressing community spaces throughout the metropolitan area. The Community Connection Infrastructure designation created formal recognition for neighborhood educational centers. providing both regulatory protection and implementation support for spaces demonstrating integrated approach similar to our learning exchange model. When local newspaper featured extensive profile examining the center's impact beyond specific programs or services, the reporter captured something essential about its significance within contemporary development context. The Sycamore Street Learning Exchange represents more than successful community center or preservation victory. It demonstrates alternative development approach, measuring neighborhood vitality through educational opportunity, intergenerational connection, and shared purpose alongside conventional market metrics that typically dominate planning decisions. Reading. This assessment, I reflected on remarkable journey from that shocking evening, finding myself displaced from my home, with crude sign declaring me unwelcome in space representing decades of personal history and community connection. The betrayal had been profound. Not just violation of legal property rights, but fundamental dismissal of values and relationships defining home beyond mere ownership. Yet this painful experience had ultimately revealed clarity and purpose that might otherwise have remained dormant beneath comfortable routines and good intentions. The threatened loss of both personal home and community center had crystallized understanding about what truly mattered. Not property ownership or market value, but human connections and shared purpose creating neighborhood identity beyond commercial development metrics. Most remarkably, this clarity had eventually created unexpected bridge with Michael that our previous comfortable disagreements had never achieved. While our fundamental value systems remained distinct, the concrete manifestation of different approaches had created space for mutual recognition that abstract discussions never accomplished. Our relationship would always contain tension between differing perspectives, but these differences now represented complementary expertise rather than oppositional positions. As I watched grandchildren, enthusiastically engaging with programs in space that might have become parking facility without intervention protecting community resources, the journey's significance extended far beyond personal vindication or property victory. The sign declaring "Stay out of our house" had triggered response creating demonstration that community development could measure success through metrics beyond market value, while establishing model applicable far beyond our specific circumstances. Sometimes, painful betrayal reveals clarity about what truly matters, creating opportunity for purpose beyond what might otherwise have remained comfortable but unfulfilled intentions. Legacy isn't measured through property ownership or market value, but through values demonstrated and community impact created through purposeful action, aligned with deeper principles transcending individual circumstances. When I returned from Costa Rica to find my bed moved to the garage with that cruel sign, I could never have anticipated how that shocking moment would ultimately lead to community transformation far more meaningful than mere property reclamation or personal vindication. The learning exchange now stands as living testimony to possibility of creating meaning from betrayal, purpose from disappointment, and community benefit from what might otherwise have been merely private property dispute measuring value solely through market metrics. 5 years later. Grandma Eleanor, they want us in position for the ribbon cutting, Emma called, now 17 and remarkably poised as she coordinated the day's events with clipboard efficiency that reminded me of her father's organizational precision redirected toward community purpose rather than commercial development. Made my way toward the front entrance of the expanded Sycamore Street Learning Exchange, marveling at how what had begun as desperate response to personal displacement had evolved into neighborhood transformation, extending far beyond our initial vision. The original community center building remained the heart of the complex, its historic character preserved while interior spaces continued evolving to serve contemporary educational needs. But now it anchored something more comprehensive. A community campus incorporating adjacent properties into integrated learning environment, serving thousands of residents annually, while modeling development approach replicated throughout our region. Can you believe this all started with a bed in a garage and a rude sign? Margaret whispered as she joined me for the ceremony. Our friendship deepened through 5 years of collaboration, building something neither of us had initially imagined possible. At 75, I still found it remarkable how profoundly life could pivot through circumstances that initially appeared solely as painful betrayal rather than opportunity for meaningful creation. The ribbon-cutting ceremony would officially open the newest addition to our learning campus, the Intergenerational Innovation Center housing expanded technology programs, community entrepreneurship incubator, and digital media production facilities serving both educational and economic development purposes. The building occupied land previously containing abandoned commercial property that had deteriorated, while ownership disputes prevented either redevelopment or restoration, its transformation representing another example of integrating preservation values with contemporary function through community-centered approach. What made this particular expansion especially meaningful wasn't just programmatic growth, but the partnership framework that had created it. Collaboration, including Michael's development company alongside community organizations, educational institutions, and public agencies. The financing structure represented innovative blend of market mechanisms, philanthropic investment, and public resources demonstrating economically sustainable approach to community development beyond traditional either-or frameworks separating commercial interests from neighborhood priorities. This project represents evolution beyond false dichotomies that have limited community development options for decades, noted the mayor during her remarks before the ribbon cutting. The integration model pioneered here demonstrates how economic vitality, educational opportunity, and neighborhood character can be mutually reinforcing rather than competing priorities when development centers community participation alongside market mechanisms. As Michael stepped forward to make remarks representing the development partnership, I reflected on remarkable evolution in both our personal relationship and his professional approach over these 5 years. While our fundamental values remained distinct, his continuing to prioritize market efficiency and financial sustainability, while mine emphasized community connection and human development, mutual recognition had replaced dismissive opposition, creating collaborative approach, incorporating diverse perspectives within integrated framework. When the learning exchange began 5 years ago, I viewed it primarily through traditional development metrics focused on property utilization efficiency and economic return, Michael acknowledged with surprising candor to the assembled crowd. What this project has demonstrated, through measurable outcomes rather than merely philosophical arguments, is expanded framework for assessing community development success through complementary metrics beyond conventional financial calculations. His presentation included compelling data documenting neighborhood impacts extending beyond specific programming outcomes, housing stability figures showing decreased resident displacement despite rising regional property values, educational achievement metrics demonstrating improved outcomes among neighborhood children participating in center programs, and economic development indicators tracking small business creation supported through entrepreneurship resources housed within the Learning Campus. The Innovation Center we're opening today represents further evolution integrating economic development within community-centered approach, he explained, displaying architectural renderings highlighting how the design balanced preservation elements with contemporary function. The Entrepreneur Incubator provides business development resources traditionally available only in commercial districts, while training programs create workforce pipeline addressing both employer needs and neighborhood economic opportunity simultaneously. This framing economic benefits alongside community connection rather than privileging either exclusively represented meaningful evolution beyond oppositional thinking that had characterized our initial conflict 5 years earlier. Michael hadn't abandoned his market-oriented perspective, but had expanded its application to include complementary measurement systems, capturing more comprehensive understanding of development impact beyond purely financial metrics. As the ribbon cutting proceeded amid enthusiastic community celebration, I found myself reflecting on journey that had brought us to this moment from that shocking evening returning from Costa Rica. The catalyst had been traumatic displacement. Finding my belongings relegated to garage with crude sign declaring me unwelcome in my own home, despite legal rights established through life estate provisions. Yet this painful betrayal had ultimately revealed clarity about what truly mattered, creating opportunity for purpose beyond what might have remained comfortable but unfulfilled intentions. The wider impact. The afternoon following the ribbon cutting, the Learning Exchange hosted Policy Roundtable, bringing together representatives from municipalities throughout the region to discuss community-centered development approaches, addressing challenges beyond our specific neighborhood. The gathering reflected how what had begun as personal response to property dispute had evolved into development model, with applications addressing broader societal issues around community preservation, educational access, and equitable development patterns. What makes this model particularly relevant for contemporary challenges is its integration of seemingly competing priorities into collaborative framework, noted the regional planning director during discussion exploring application across diverse contexts. Rather than positioning development interests against community preservation as inherently oppositional, this approach creates shared measurement systems acknowledging multiple valid perspectives on neighborhood vitality. This characterization, multiple, valid frameworks measuring success rather than privileging any single metric exclusively, captured essential evolution in my own thinking alongside Michael's over these 5 years. The initial conflict had positioned market values against community preservation as inherently opposing considerations, each side dismissing the other's perspective as either coldly calculating or impractically idealistic. What had emerged through implementation was recognition that complementary measurement systems captured more complete understanding of neighborhood health than either framework alone could provide. The data demonstrates correlation between community connection infrastructure and conventional economic indicators previously considered unrelated, Michael contributed, his analytical precision now applied to expanded measurement framework beyond purely financial calculations. Neighborhoods with robust educational resources, intergenerational programming, and community gathering spaces show measurably greater stability through market fluctuations, with corresponding benefits for conventional economic metrics including property values, business retention, and investment predictability. This perspective, community resources creating measurable economic benefits alongside less quantifiable social outcomes, provided bridge across value systems previously considered fundamentally incompatible. While Michael continued viewing development primarily through market lens, he now incorporated complementary metrics, acknowledging community connection infrastructure as meaningful component within comprehensive assessment framework rather than merely sentimental consideration. As discussion continued exploring specific application across diverse neighborhood contexts, participants raised critical implementation questions, addressing practical challenges beyond philosophical alignment. How could similar initiatives secure sustainable funding beyond initial philanthropic investment? What governance structures balanced institutional partnerships with genuine community participation? Which physical design approaches successfully integrated preservation priorities with contemporary function? These questions reflected evolution beyond simplistic opposition toward nuanced implementation challenges requiring diverse expertise. Exactly. The integrated approach our learning campus now demonstrated through multiple completed projects representing different application contexts. The original community center renovation had established basic model. Subsequent additions had refined implementation, addressing diverse priorities from historic preservation to economic development while maintaining consistent community-centered approach. During working lunch, where roundtable participants divided into implementation focus groups, I found myself seated with educators from throughout the region, exploring how the learning campus model might address educational equity challenges beyond our specific neighborhood context. The conversation highlighted another dimension of impact extending from what had begun as personal property dispute, application addressing systemic issues affecting communities throughout metropolitan area. What's particularly valuable about this model from educational perspective is integration of formal institutional resources with community knowledge and relationships, observed superintendent from district serving predominantly low-income neighborhoods. The partnership structure creates sustainability beyond what either community volunteers or institutional programs alone could maintain, while relationship-based implementation ensures programming remains responsive to actual resident priorities rather than imposed solutions. This assessment, institutional resources made effective through community relationships, captured essential dynamic that distinguished our approach from either purely volunteer-driven efforts, eventually exhausting, limited community capacity, or institutional programs lacking authentic resident engagement. The learning exchange demonstrated sustainable alternative through reciprocal partnership framework, where each participating entity received legitimate value aligned with core mission while collectively creating community resource beyond what any single organization could establish independently. By afternoon's end, working groups had developed preliminary implementation frameworks adapting our model for specific applications throughout the region. From repurposing abandoned school buildings in post-industrial neighborhoods to incorporating educational spaces within transit-oriented development projects along new rail corridors. What had begun as response to personal displacement and community threat had evolved into replicable approach addressing diverse challenges through common principles, balancing preservation with adaptation, institutional resources with community, participation, and economic development with neighborhood character. The family dimension. That evening, our family gathered for dinner at my home, regular tradition established gradually over years following the initial conflict. While our Sunday meals had begun somewhat tentatively as carefully neutral ground for relationship repair, they had evolved into genuine connection points where multiple generations shared experiences across otherwise separate life dimensions. Most remarkably, the grandchildren had become bridge builders, translating between different value systems represented by their father and grandmother, their natural integration of seemingly competing perspectives suggesting possibility beyond either-or thinking that had characterized our initial conflict. The Innovation Center's entrepreneur program already has 15 applications for the first cohort, Emma reported enthusiastically, her growing involvement with the Learning Campus reflecting integration of her father's business acumen with my educational values. 3 are from neighborhood residents who've never had access to conventional business development resources, despite viable concepts with potential market validation. At 17, Emma had developed remarkable capacity integrating different measurement frameworks without perceiving inherent contradiction between community impact and market viability. Her current project developing evaluation metrics for the entrepreneurship program reflected this integration, measuring success through both conventional business outcomes and community benefit indicators without privileging either exclusively. The program design incorporates market validation frameworks while addressing barriers preventing neighborhood residents from accessing conventional business development resources, she explained, her articulation reflecting sophistication beyond typical teenage enthusiasm. The evaluation captures both standard success metrics like revenue growth and sustainability, while measuring community impact through local hiring, service accessibility, and neighborhood economic circulation. Michael listened with evident pride, transcending any lingering disagreement about development priorities or neighborhood transformation approaches. Whatever philosophical differences remained between us regarding fundamental value systems, his recognition of Emma's capacity integrating different perspectives represented meaningful evolution beyond dismissive opposition, characterizing our initial conflict. The market analysis portion is quite sophisticated, he acknowledged with professional respect rather than merely parental encouragement. The identification of specific barriers preventing viable concepts from accessing conventional development resources demonstrates legitimate market inefficiency. The program addresses through targeted intervention rather than general subsidy. This framing, market-based justification for community-centered approach, reflected Michael's continuing evolution integrating different value systems within his core professional framework. While he still viewed development primarily through market lens, he now recognized community-centered approaches as potentially addressing legitimate market inefficiencies, rather than merely representing sentimental attachment to outdated structures or programs. As dinner conversation continued ranging across family matters, community developments, and broader societal issues, I reflected on remarkable healing that had occurred despite remaining differences in fundamental values and priorities. Michael would never fully embrace community connection as primary metric replacing market considerations in his development approach. I would continue measuring success primarily through human relationship and neighborhood character, rather than financial calculations. Yet mutual recognition had replaced dismissive opposition, creating space for collaboration transcending binary thinking that had characterized our initial conflict. Most meaningfully, this evolution had created legacy extending beyond either personal property transmission or professional accomplishment alone. The grandchildren were developing capacity, integrating seemingly competing value systems into complementary framework, acknowledging multiple valid perspectives on community, vitality, and personal success beyond either-or thinking. This integration, respecting both market efficiency and human connection as legitimate considerations without absolute prioritization, represented perhaps the most significant transformation emerging from what had begun as painful betrayal and displacement. The personal evolution. Later that evening, after family departed, I sat in my garden reflecting on remarkable journey from that traumatic return, finding myself displaced from my own home with crude sign declaring me unwelcome despite legal rights established through life estate provisions. The betrayal had been profound, not just violation of property arrangements, but fundamental dismissal of my existence and connection to space, representing decades of shared history and community engagement. Yet this painful experience had ultimately revealed clarity and purpose that might otherwise have remained dormant beneath comfortable routines and good intentions. The threatened loss of both personal home and community center had crystallized understanding about what truly mattered. Not property ownership or market value, but human connections and shared purpose creating neighborhood identity beyond commercial development metrics. This clarity had led not just to successful defense against displacement, but creation of something far more significant than property preservation alone. The learning exchange had demonstrated alternative development approach, measuring neighborhood vitality through educational opportunity, intergenerational connection, and shared purpose alongside conventional market metrics typically dominating planning decisions. The model had evolved through multiple implementation phases demonstrating application across diverse contexts while maintaining consistent community-centered principles. Most remarkably, this journey had transformed my understanding of legacy beyond conventional inheritance frameworks, privileging property transmission or financial security exclusively. While material resources provided necessary foundation for community initiatives and personal security, meaningful legacy emerged through values demonstrated and purpose created, rather than merely assets transferred between generations. The grandchildren had received something more valuable than either property inheritance or financial security alone. Lived demonstration of purposeful response, transforming betrayal into creative opportunity, serving needs beyond individual circumstances. Emma's integration of business acumen with community purpose, Ethan's combination of technical skill with intergenerational connection, these represented legacy transcending material resources or professional accomplishment alone. As my reflection continued beneath stars appearing gradually over my garden, the same garden from which I had drawn solace during the most difficult periods following initial displacement, I recognized how profoundly this experience had transformed my own understanding of home beyond property ownership or legal rights. While successful legal action had restored my rightful occupancy against Michael's improper displacement attempt, Deeper security had emerged through community connection and shared purpose transcending physical location or property control. Home existed not just in particular building or legal arrangement, but through relationships and purpose creating belonging beyond material considerations. The Learning Campus, now extending beyond original community center to include multiple properties serving diverse educational and community functions, represented home in this expanded understanding as much as my private residence did through conventional definition. This perspective didn't diminish importance of legal protection against improper displacement or property rights preservation against unauthorized transfer. The life estate provisions had provided essential foundation, preventing permanent exclusion from my home despite Michael's improper actions. Yet meaningful security extended beyond legal arrangements alone through community connections and shared purpose creating belonging transcending any particular physical location or property control. At 75, this understanding provided remarkable freedom from attachment while maintaining appreciation for material foundations supporting purposeful engagement. My home remained precious as both personal sanctuary and physical embodiment of values Daniel and I had demonstrated throughout our lives together. Yet identity and security existed beyond any particular property or location through relationships and purpose that would continue regardless of eventual transitions, inevitable through aging process. When I eventually required care beyond independent living capacity, this understanding would provide graceful transition rather than traumatic displacement. Not because circumstances would differ fundamentally, but because meaning and identity existed beyond particular physical arrangement or property control. Home would continue through relationships and purpose regardless of specific location or living configuration. The regional model. The following month brought unexpected validation of the Learning Campus model's significance beyond our specific neighborhood context. Regional Planning Commission incorporated Community Connection Infrastructure designation into Comprehensive Development Framework, creating formal recognition and implementation support for spaces demonstrating integrated approach similar to our learning exchange model. The designation provided both regulatory protection and implementation resources for community educational centers throughout metropolitan area, acknowledging their essential contribution to neighborhood vitality alongside more conventional infrastructure considerations. The Commission's formal report specifically cited data from our 5-year implementation, documenting correlation between community educational resources and conventional neighborhood stability metrics. Properties within quarter-mile radius of established community learning centers demonstrated measurably greater stability through market fluctuations, with corresponding benefits for traditional economic indicators, including property values, business retention, and investment predictability. These findings suggest community connection infrastructure represents essential component within comprehensive neighborhood development strategy rather than merely supplemental amenity. This characterization, essential infrastructure rather than optional amenity, represented significant evolution in development framework beyond our specific implementation. What had begun as defensive response to personal displacement and community threat had evolved into recognized component within regional planning approach addressing challenges throughout metropolitan area. When Regional Foundation convened Implementation Summit bringing together community organizations, institutional partners, and municipal representatives to expand the model, I found myself seated beside Michael on expert panel discussing essential elements for successful adaptation across diverse contexts. Our different perspectives, his emphasizing market sustainability and financial structure, while mine focused on community engagement and educational purpose, now represented complementary expertise rather than opposing positions. The economic analysis demonstrates correlation between community connection infrastructure and neighborhood stability metrics. Conventional development frameworks typically consider unrelated, Michael explained, presenting data tracking property, values, business retention, and investment patterns surrounding established learning centers. These findings suggest community educational resources represent legitimate market consideration within comprehensive development strategy rather than merely social benefit separate from economic fundamentals. My contribution complemented this market analysis with implementation principles addressing community engagement beyond transactional consultation. Sustainable centers require governance structure balancing institutional resources with authentic resident participation beyond token representation. The reciprocal partnership framework ensures programming remains responsive to actual community priorities while leveraging institutional capacity beyond what volunteer efforts alone could maintain. Our integrated presentation, linking market considerations with community engagement through complementary rather than oppositional framework, reflected evolution beyond binary thinking that had characterized our initial conflict 5 years earlier. The audience response confirmed recognition that false dichotomy between market-driven development and community preservation limited potential solutions addressing contemporary challenges facing neighborhoods throughout our region. What makes this model particularly valuable for current implementation challenges is integration of diverse measurement frameworks beyond conventional development metrics. Noted Foundation Director summarizing discussion. The documented correlation between community connection infrastructure and neighborhood stability suggests different development approach worth exploring from market perspective, while advancing social objectives beyond commercial considerations. This assessment, acknowledging multiple valid frameworks measuring neighborhood vitality, rather than privileging either market or community metrics exclusively, captured essential evolution in development, thinking our learning campus had demonstrated, through measurable outcomes rather than merely philosophical argument. The model provided practical implementation pathway, integrating seemingly competing priorities into collaborative approach, addressing challenges throughout metropolitan area. The final reflection. 10 years after that shocking evening returning, from Costa Rica to find my belongings relegated to garage with crude sign declaring me unwelcome in my own home, I stood in the Learning Campus Central Plaza watching community gatherings celebrating decade of transformation extending far beyond our initial vision. What had begun as desperate response to personal displacement had evolved into neighborhood revitalization approach replicated throughout our region, while demonstrating development model integrating preservation with adaptation, institutional resources with community participation, and economic development with neighborhood character. The campus now encompassed multiple properties serving diverse educational and community functions while maintaining cohesive identity through consistent design principles and integrated programming. The original community center remained literal and figurative heart of the complex, its historic character preserved while interior spaces continued evolving to serve contemporary educational needs. Surrounding buildings demonstrated different application contexts from historic preservation to new construction, each maintaining consistent community-centered approach while addressing specific functional requirements and neighborhood context considerations. Most remarkably, the campus had expanded to include property Michael's company had initially targeted for commercial development when orchestrating my displacement from my home. The tract adjacent to original community center, once designated for parking facility supporting commercial development, now housed intergenerational residential community, combining senior apartments with student housing through innovative design creating natural mentoring relationships and shared community spaces. The project represented perhaps the most meaningful evolution in our journey from conflict to collaboration, its integrated approach reflecting both market viability and community purpose through complementary rather than oppositional framework. As community gathering continued around me, familiar faces representing decade of shared purpose acknowledged my presence with genuine appreciation, transcending mere politeness. Teachers whose classroom practice had been transformed through community practicums, seniors whose isolation had been replaced through intergenerational programming, entrepreneurs whose businesses had developed through incubator resources, all represented living testimony to impact extending beyond specific programs or services to fundamental transformation in how community defined itself and measured success beyond conventional metrics. Emma joined me, now 22, and recently graduated with dual degrees in business and education, that perfectly symbolized integration beyond false dichotomies, separating market considerations from community purpose. Her current role developing similar centers in underserved neighborhoods throughout metropolitan area represented legacy extending beyond either property inheritance or professional accomplishment alone. Purposeful application of capacity integrating, seemingly competing value systems into complementary framework, addressing contemporary challenges through multiple valid perspectives. "Can you believe this all started with that awful sign in the garage?" she marveled, her awareness of our journey's beginning maintained through family narrative, without bitterness or resentment clouding its transformative significance. Dad was telling potential partners yesterday how his perspective completely transformed through watching this place evolve from concept he initially opposed into model he's now helping implement throughout the region. Michael's evolution, from orchestrating my displacement to collaborating on implementation expanding the model, represented perhaps the most remarkable transformation in our journey. While our fundamental values remained distinct, mutual recognition had replaced dismissive opposition, creating collaborative approach incorporating diverse perspectives within integrated framework, addressing challenges neither approach alone could adequately resolve. The sign said, "Stay out of our house." But what happened instead was creation of everyone's home in the fullest sense of belonging, I reflected, watching community members of all ages engaged in activities throughout the campus with evident ownership transcending mere participation. Home isn't just about property rights or physical space, but purpose and connection creating security beyond material considerations alone. This understanding, home as connection and purpose beyond property, represented perhaps the most profound, personal transformation emerging from journey that had begun with shocking displacement and betrayal. While legal action had rightfully restored my property occupancy against improper exclusion, deeper security had emerged through community connection and shared purpose, creating belonging transcending any particular physical location or legal arrangement. As afternoon transitioned toward evening, the gathering evolved into celebration featuring performances, exhibits, and demonstrations representing diverse programs housed throughout the learning campus. The central plaza filled with tables for community dinner, where residents shared dishes reflecting neighborhood's cultural heritage, while student documentary team captured oral histories from longtime community members for digital archive preserving. Neighborhood evolution through resident perspectives alongside formal documentation. Michael appeared with Jennifer and Ethan, now 20, and developing architectural portfolio reflecting integration of preservation principles with contemporary function that symbolized another dimension of values transmission beyond either commercial development or historical conservation, exclusively. Their presence represented not just family reconciliation, but evolution beyond binary thinking that had characterized our initial conflict toward recognition that multiple valid perspectives could coexist within integrated framework. The new mixed-use project incorporating community learning space breaks ground next month, Michael mentioned after family greetings, his professional updates now shared with genuine recognition of my interest, rather than mere politeness. The financing structure incorporates elements from campus model here, while adapting for specific neighborhood context and institutional partnerships available in that area. This evolution, adapting core principles for different implementation contexts rather than imposing standardized approach, reflected sophisticated understanding beyond either market determinism or community preservation absolutism. Development. Addressing contemporary challenges required nuanced application, balancing preservation with adaptation, institutional resources with community participation, and economic development with neighborhood character through context, specific implementation, rather than rigid, ideological framework. As evening continued with community performances representing diverse cultural traditions within our neighborhood, I reflected on remarkable journey from devastation to creation that had defined these 10 years. The sign declaring "Stay out of our house" had triggered response, creating something none of us had initially imagined. Demonstration that community development could measure success through metrics beyond market value while establishing model replicable beyond our specific circumstances. Legacy existed not just through property transmission or financial security, but values demonstrated and purpose created, extending beyond individual circumstances to address broader societal challenges. The Learning Campus represented tangible embodiment of this understanding, physical manifestation of response, transforming betrayal into opportunity, serving needs beyond personal vindication or property reclamation. Sometimes life's most profound purpose emerges through circumstances initially experienced solely as painful betrayal rather than opportunity for meaningful creation. The displacement that had greeted my return from Costa Rica had ultimately revealed clarity about what truly mattered, creating catalyst for transformation extending far beyond personal circumstances or property dispute to demonstrate development. Approach measuring success through human connection and shared purpose alongside conventional market metrics. As I prepared to depart the celebration, community members of all ages approached with appreciation, transcending mere politeness to acknowledge shared journey, extending beyond specific programs or services. Their expressions reflected recognition that the Learning Campus represented more than successful educational center or preservation victory. It demonstrated possibility beyond false dichotomies, limiting potential solutions, addressing contemporary challenges through integrated approach, honoring multiple valid perspectives on what creates truly thriving neighborhoods and meaningful legacy. The crude sign that had declared "Stay out of our house" 10 years earlier had ultimately produced exactly the opposite of its intended exclusion: creation of community home in fullest sense of belonging, transcending property ownership or legal arrangements through shared purpose and connection across generations. Legacy existed not through assets transferred but values demonstrated and community impact created through purposeful response, transforming betrayal into opportunity for creation, serving needs far beyond individual circumstances or private property. Considerations. When I returned from Costa Rica to find my bed, moved to the garage with that shocking sign, I could never have anticipated how that painful moment would ultimately lead to community transformation and personal evolution far more meaningful than mere property reclamation or legal vindication. The Learning Campus now stands as living testimony to possibility of creating meaning from betrayal, purpose from disappointment, and community benefit from what might otherwise have been merely private property dispute, measuring value solely through market metrics alone. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.